There's a photograph on my phone I've never deleted. I took it on a Tuesday in November, which matters because November in London isn't the beautiful gray that postcards pretend it is. It's the other gray, the one that gets into your coat, the one that sits on your shoulders like something with weight. I've been in the city for 11 days at that point, working a contract job near Victoria that had stretched from 2 weeks into 2 months the way those things do, and I'd started taking long walks in the mornings before the office got loud. Not tourist walks, just walks. The kind where you don't have a destination. You just move, because moving feels like the only honest thing to do when everything else feels stuck. That particular Tuesday, I ended up near St. James's Park, then past it. Then, without quite deciding to, I was standing on the mall, looking up at the pale face of Buckingham Palace in the gray morning light. And there are already tourists there. There are always already tourists there at any hour, in any weather, as if they materialize from the ground. And I had nowhere to be for another 90 minutes, so I just stood. That's when I saw him. He was posted at the gate closest to the Queen Victoria Memorial, the one on the right if you're facing the palace. Tall, dressed in the full ceremonial kit. The bearskin, the red tunic, the black trousers with the red stripe, the polished boots that caught what little light November was offering and threw it back like a rebuke. He stood in the wooden sentry box with his rifle at his side, and his eyes, I noticed this even from 20 feet away, his eyes were fixed on the exact middle distance that these men are trained to fix on. Not at you, not past you, through you, like your glass. I'd seen guard before, lived in London for stretches over the years, done the tourist thing once when I was 23, and had a camera and no self-consciousness. I'd seen the shouting crowds, the people who stand 6 inches from the guards' faces and talk at them like they're interactive exhibits. I'd seen all of it, but I had never stood there long enough and quiet enough to actually watch. Not perform watching, actually watch. So I did. His name, I would not learn until much later, was Marcus. Not because anyone told me, because I read it in a small local newsletter piece some months after, the kind of thing that doesn't get shared widely, doesn't go viral, just exists in the way that truth usually exists, quietly, for the people willing to go looking. But that Tuesday morning, I didn't know his name. I just knew his face. And his face, when I was close enough, standing near the memorial and pretending to study the stone figures, his face was doing something that I don't think he knew it was doing. His jaw was set, properly set, the way a person sets a jaw when they have been told, since the first week of training, that setting the jaw is part of the job. The chin level, the mouth flat, the expression neutral. But around his eyes, there was something around his eyes that the jaw setting couldn't reach. I want to be precise here, because imprecision would be a kind of dishonesty. It wasn't pain. It wasn't sadness in any clean, nameable sense. It was more like, you know, the look of a person who has been awake for 20 hours and has 10 more to go and has stopped thinking about the 20 or the 10 and has just collapsed entirely into the present moment. That flat, interior absence. That look of a person who has sent every non-essential part of themselves somewhere else, somewhere safer, and left only the mechanical remainder standing at the post. That was what was around his eyes. And I stood there in the cold, and I watched a man hold his body like a building, and I thought, nobody's going to ask him how he's doing today. Not one person. Not one. There were maybe 40 people clustered in that area by 7:15 in the morning. I know that sounds like a lot for pre-8 on a gray Tuesday, but this is the palace. The palace never sleeps the way other places sleep. It just dims a little. There were 2 women with matching luggage who were taking photographs. There was a man in a high-visibility vest who had nothing to do with the palace and was eating a breakfast roll and watching traffic. There was a school group. Even at that hour, even in November, a school group, trailing a woman with a laminated card on a lanyard who was explaining something about the changing of the guard, which wouldn't happen for another several hours, but the explanation was apparently not optional. There were 3 young men who I initially clocked as university students, which turned out to be true, who were daring each other. You could tell by the particular energy, the jostling, the half-suppressed laughter, to go stand next to the guard and make faces. This is a thing that happens. This is a thing that happens every single day, multiple times, at multiple posts, in multiple weathers, in multiple seasons. The making of faces. The attempts to get a reaction. The selfies taken 3 inches from a person's nose. The whooping when someone gets close enough. The treating of another human being as a theme park feature. I watched the 2 of them go up to Marcus's box. The third one lost his nerve and stayed back. And I watched them do the thing. The leaning in. The exaggerated expressions. The phone held up sideways. The laughing directly into a face that had been trained, at enormous psychological cost, I would come to understand, not to flinch. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't blink at a rate that suggested disturbance. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't, and this is the part that stays with me, he didn't let anything in his eyes change. The 2 students got their photograph. They went back to their friend, showing him the screen, laughing about something. They moved on within 2 minutes. They didn't look back at him. Why would they? They had what they came for. I stayed for almost an hour. I know that probably sounds strange. I'm a 41-year-old man in a contract job, standing in the cold outside a palace, watching a guard stand still. But there was something that kept me there that I couldn't name at the time, and can only try to name now, months later, with the photograph still on my phone, and that newsletter piece sitting in a folder on my laptop. What kept me was this. I kept waiting for him to crack. Not in a cruel way. Not hoping for it. I kept expecting the natural limit of a human body to reassert itself. A micro shift of weight. A slow blink that lasted a half-second too long. A breath that came out too hard. Something. Because it was cold. And I knew, even then, without knowing anything specific about his schedule or his life, that he had not started his morning at this gate. That there had been a before. An early before, a darkened 4:30 a.m. before, with kit to clean and boots to polish, and a breakfast eaten in a hall with other men who were also preparing their bodies to be monuments. And that there would be an after. An after I also couldn't see. But I was watching the during. The long, standing, freezing, being photographed, being stared at, being ignored as a person during. And his body held. His body just kept holding. At 7:48. I know because I checked my phone to see how much time I had left before I needed to start walking. A small girl broke from a school group. She was maybe 7. Red coat, dark hair, one of those backpacks shaped like an animal that small children carry. She came around the edge of the cluster group and walked directly toward Marcus with the absolute fearlessness of someone who has not yet learned that fearlessness has a cost. She stopped about 2 feet from the sentry box. Looked up. He looked, through her, past her, the practiced gaze fixed. She looked up for a long time. Then, she said, clear as a bell in the cold air, "Are you tired?" The teacher behind her made a sound, started moving toward her. The nearby tourists registered it with the particular alertness people get when a child is about to provide entertainment. Marcus did not answer. He was not supposed to answer. The protocol is the protocol, and the protocol exists for reasons that have nothing to do with whether the person asking deserves an answer. But his eyes moved, just for a second. They came down from the middle distance, and they found her face, this small girl in the red coat with the animal backpack, and they found her face, and something shifted there that I cannot fully describe, and will not try to fully describe because try would make it smaller than it was. Then they went back up, to the middle distance, through all of us. The teacher collected the girl. The tourists went back to their phones. The school group shuffled. The moment closed over itself like water. But I stood there for another 6 minutes, not watching him anymore, just standing in the same cold he was standing in, and I thought about a little girl who had asked a question that 40 adults hadn't thought to ask. And I thought about a man whose eyes had answered it. And then I took the photograph. Not of him, because that felt like the same invasion everyone else was committing, but of the empty space in front of the sentry box. The gray stones. The pale sky. The memorial behind. The negative space where all of this had happened. I still don't know exactly why I took it. I think it's because I needed proof that I'd been standing in the right place at the right moment. That I'd seen what I thought I'd seen. That the question the little girl asked was real, and the answer in his eyes was real, and the 40 people who didn't ask were real, and all of it was real. I walk into the office at 8:53. Sit down. Open my laptop. And I don't tell anyone about it for a very long time. The second time I saw him, I wasn't looking. That's the honest version. The version that doesn't make me sound like I spent the next 3 weeks deliberately haunting the palace perimeter, which I didn't. I want to be clear about that. I went back to the mall because it was on my walking route, and my walking route existed because the city is expensive and walking is free, and that's the whole story of why I was there again on a Friday afternoon in the same November, standing near the same memorial with the same gray sky doing its gray November thing overhead. I almost didn't recognize him, not because he looked different, because I'd stored the memory of him differently. In that particular filing system, the brain builds for emotional events, where you remember the feeling precisely, but the visual detail softens around the edges. I'd remembered the stillness, the jaw, the thing around his eyes. I had not remembered specifically the height of him, the particular width of his shoulders inside the tunic. But I recognized the stillness. You don't forget a stillness like that. It's too specific. It's too earned. The Friday afternoon crowd was different from the Tuesday morning crowd in every way that matters. More tourists, obviously. The tail end of the school trip season, so there were two groups I could see, both in high-visibility jackets, both trailing adults with laminates, and the particular expression of people who are paid to be enthusiastic about things. There was a queue forming for something I couldn't identify. People in London queue for things without knowing what the queue is for. It's almost genetic at this point, and there were a dozen people around the Victoria Memorial doing the standard thing, which is photograph the monument, photograph the palace, photograph yourself with both, move on. Marcus was at a different post. Not the same sentry box. He was doing the slow march, the ceremonial pace back and forth, the measured steps that look like a clock mechanism running on human sinew. Left, right, pivot, left, right, pivot. Rifle at the slope. The pace is exactly 1 step per second. I know this because I counted. I counted because watching it, really watching it, you start to understand that nothing about it is accidental. The slowness is designed. The weight of each step is designed. The pause at the turn is designed. The whole thing is a kind of argument being made with a body, an argument about precision and permanence and the existence of something that will not be moved by the casualness of the world around it. It is a genuinely extraordinary thing to watch, and most of the people around me were watching it through phone screens. I want to stop here and say something because I've been going around this thought for months, and I want to try to say it plainly. I don't think the people taking photographs are bad people. I don't think they're deliberately cruel or that they wake up in the morning with a plan to dehumanize a ceremonial soldier. I think, and this is the generous interpretation which I've chosen to hold on to because the alternative makes the world smaller. I think they genuinely don't register that there is a person inside the uniform. The uniform does that. That's part of what it's designed to do. The bearskin adds 8 or 9 inches to his height. The tunic has no wrinkles. The boots have no scuffs. The whole construction is so total, so complete, so overwhelmingly finished in the way a statue is finished that the brain files it differently. Not under man standing, under exhibit. And exhibits don't get tired. Exhibits don't have bodies that ache at the lower back after 6 hours of this. Exhibits don't have minds that have learned to find a neutral interior space and live there for the duration, because the alternative to actually be present mentally for every tourist and every shout and every flash would hollow you out within a week. Exhibits don't have families they drove away from before the sun came up, but the man inside the exhibit does. All of it. I was watching him do the march when the incident happened. I'm going to call it an incident because that's what it was, though it would never appear in any official record. It would never be logged or reported. It would be the kind of thing that the man himself would probably describe if asked with a single dry sentence and a subject change. There was a group, 5 or 6 adults, one of whom had clearly been drinking, which at 3 in the afternoon is its own kind of statement about a person's Friday. Not falling down drunk. The louder, more performative kind. The kind of drunk that needs an audience and will manufacture one from whatever's available. The man, I'm going to call him that, not give him more specificity than he deserves, came forward from the group while Marcus was at the far end of his march and started following him. Walking behind him, mimicking the pace, arms swinging, high-stepping. His friends were filming. It got laughter from some of the nearby crowd. A few people looked uncomfortable. Most people kept watching through their screens, and screens make everything smaller and safer and easier to observe without having to decide what you think about it. Marcus did not alter his pace, did not look back, did not acknowledge the shadow moving behind him with its mocking high steps and its drunk grin and its audience. Left, right. Pivot. Left, right. The man got closer. The gap between them shrank to 2, 3 steps. He was saying something. I couldn't hear the words, but the shape of the mouth and the laughter from his group suggested it wasn't a philosophical inquiry. He put his hand out, not quite touching, hovering just behind Marcus's shoulder, doing the thing that cowards do when they want to push a limit without technically crossing it. And Marcus, he did something then that I have thought about almost every day since. He completed the next 2 paces, the pivot. Then he stopped. Not an alarm, not flinching. He stopped the way a piece of machinery stops when the operator reaches for the switch. He turned in the formal pivot of the march so that he was now facing the direction of the man behind him. He raised his rifle to the carry position, still ceremonial, still within protocol, and in the voice that these men are trained to use, the voice that comes from somewhere below the chest and lands on you like a hand on a table, he said, "Stand clear of the Queen's Guard." 4 words. No exhaustion. No raised volume beyond what was necessary for authority. No threat implied, and none needed. Just 4 words and the weight of everything behind them. The drunk man stopped. His friends went quiet. The filming stopped. 3 seconds of complete stillness in which the 30 or 40 people in the vicinity seemed to collectively hold the specific breath of people who have just been reminded that the monument has a voice. Then the drunk man laughed, the too loud laugh of someone trying to retroactively perform not having been frightened, said something to his group, and they all moved away around the corner of the memorial, gone within a minute. Marcus returned to his march. Left, right. Pivot, as if the world had hiccuped and resumed. There was applause, genuine applause from maybe 8 or 10 people nearby, including the woman standing next to me who muttered absolutely right in the clipped, satisfied tone of someone whose patience has been a long time coming. Marcus did not acknowledge the applause. Of course he didn't. Applause is just a different kind of noise from the people outside the line. The march continued. The rifle stayed at slope. The eyes stayed in the middle distance. But here's what I noticed, and this is the part I've come back to. In the seconds immediately after the drunk man was gone, after the applause started, while the march was resuming, there was a single moment where Marcus's chest rose. Just slightly. Not a gasp. Not a performance. A breath. The specific deep breath of a person who has just done something that required more than they showed, and is now briefly, privately, allowing themselves to have had a body during it. Gone in under 2 seconds. The march continuing. The stillness reasserting. But I saw it. That one breath. And I thought, this is what they praise. The fact that the one breath is all you see. The fact that the 30 things before and after the one breath are invisible. They praise the monument, and they don't think about the man inside it who took one breath in a long afternoon and then went back to being a monument. Incredible discipline, people would say later, posting the video of the 4 words. Sharing it. Commenting. What composure. What professionalism. And all of that is true, but none of it is the whole truth. The whole truth lives in that one breath. I went home a different way that Friday. I don't know why, except that I needed to walk longer than usual, and I needed the sound of the city to be louder than the sound in my own head, and those 2 needs lined up with going east instead of south. I stopped at a cafe near Trafalgar Square that I'd never been to before, and sat at a window table with a coffee I didn't particularly want, and the photograph on my phone, the empty stones, the pale sky, open on the screen. The woman at the table across from me was reading. The man by the door was on a call. 2 teenagers were taking photographs of their food. I thought about what it would cost a person to stand still and be looked at all day. Not the physical cost, though that's real. The knees, the back, the cold that gets into the uniform, no matter how many layers are underneath. The other cost. The cost of making yourself an object repeatedly, voluntarily, because the job requires it. The cost of being a thing the world takes pictures of, while simultaneously being a person who woke up at 4:30 and ate breakfast in the dark and is going to go home to what? A flat? A family? A dog? Something ordinary and human and completely invisible to everyone who watched him today. The cost of discipline is not the discipline. The discipline is the product, the thing you see. The cost is the 10,000 small decisions made in the body rather than the mind to not react, to not flinch, to not let the drunk man or the students or the school group or the cold or the ache in the lower back break the surface of the water. Every one of those decisions is a decision against the body's nature. And the body keeps the bill. The body always keeps the bill. I finished my coffee, paid, walked to Victoria, took the tube back to the neighborhood I was staying in, made dinner, watched something on my laptop that I couldn't tell you now, 6 months later, anything about. But before I fell asleep that night, I opened the photograph again. The empty stones, the pale sky, and I thought someone should ask him. Someone at some point, in some quiet moment, should just ask. Not are you okay the way people ask it, without waiting for the answer. Really ask. Sit down and look at him as a person and say, what is this like? What does a day of this feel like in your body at the end? What do you take home that you can't leave at the gate? I closed the photograph. I thought, tomorrow I'll probably walk a different route. I didn't. The newsletter piece was 800 words. It ran in a community print publication, the kind that exists in particular London neighborhoods, and is read by the particular kind of person who keeps a recycling bin near the front door and attends local meetings about parking. A small thing, a local thing, the kind of journalism that doesn't scale, doesn't travel, doesn't get an algorithm. I found it because a friend who lives near Chelsea sent me a photograph of it on her phone with the text, "Thought of you, don't know why." She didn't know why because I'd never told her about the Tuesday morning or the Friday afternoon. I'd never told anyone, actually. It had just sat in me the way some things sit, not festering, not urgent, just present. A stone in the pocket of a coat you keep wearing. The piece was about Marcus. Not an expose, not a crisis story. Nothing dramatic happened to prompt it. The writer, a woman whose byline I'd never seen and whose name I've since tried to find online and can't, which feels appropriate somehow, had simply done the thing I'd thought about doing and hadn't. She'd asked, I'm going to try to compress what the piece said without losing what it meant, which is a harder task than it sounds. Marcus had been in the household division for 7 years at the time of the interview. Joined at 20, was 27 when she spoke to him. The piece didn't run a photograph, which I respected, either his choice or hers or both. The question she asked first, she wrote, was the question the little girl had asked. Are you tired? And he'd laughed. Not the defensive laugh, not the brush-off laugh. The laugh of a person who has been asked the right question and doesn't know quite what to do with the rightness of it. Then he'd answered, I want to be honest about how I read this piece. I read it 3 times in a row, sitting on the floor of my temporary flat, which had a broken lamp and a window that let the cold through no matter what I did to the seal. And I read it the way you read things that confirm something you've been carrying without knowing it had a name. What he said, and I'm going to paraphrase because the piece is not mine to reproduce. What he said was that the fatigue is not the worst part. The fatigue, he said, you get used to. Not in the sense that it stops happening, in the sense that you stop locating it as a problem. Your body recalibrates. You find a new baseline. You function inside the fatigue the way you function inside cold or heat, by adjusting, not by escaping. What he said was harder to get used to is the invisibility, not the being looked at part. The opposite, the being looked through. He said, and this is the part I've turned over the most, that I keep returning to the way you return to a place where something shifted in you. He said that on his good days, the days when he could hold it philosophically, he understood that the uniform was the point, that he was a symbol, and symbols work by being more than the person wearing them, that his individuality was something he set aside at the gate, the way you set aside a coat, and picked up again when his duty ended. But on his harder days, on the harder days, he said, the thing that crept in, not loudly, not dramatically, just crept the way cold creeps through a bad window seal, was the thought that no one was going to ask him how he was doing. Not because they were cruel, because it genuinely didn't occur to them that the thing standing at the gate was having a day of any particular character. The good days and the hard days looked the same from outside the uniform. They always would. The writer asked, "Does that bother you?" And he thought about it for a while, she wrote. Long enough that she described the silence. Then he said, "It used to. Now it just feels like part of what the job costs." He said it without bitterness. She was clear about that. Not performing acceptance, not the brittle version that means the bitterness got parked somewhere. Just settled into the knowledge of it. This is the cost. I've paid it. I'll pay it tomorrow. There was a section in the middle of the piece about his family. A sister in Birmingham. A mother who, in the early years of his posting, would call on his duty days and ask how it had been, and he would say, "Fine." Long cold in winter, hot in summer. Fine. And she eventually stopped asking because fine was all she had access to, and after a while fine becomes a kind of wall. Not because you mean it as one, but because there's no vocabulary available for the thing you'd say instead. He said he didn't know how to explain the interior of it to people who hadn't done it. Not the ceremonies, not the marching. Those you could describe. Those have a shape. The interior, the specific practice of making yourself unreachable by your surroundings. The mental architecture required to stand inside a crowd of people behaving badly at you and locate, every few seconds, the part of you that doesn't live in your face. The years of conditioning that mean you can hear someone say something genuinely stupid 6 inches from your ear and feel nothing register on your skin. He said the first year, he'd go home after duty and feel like he'd been beaten. Not physically, somewhere else. He said a fellow soldier had described it once as being sandblasted. That every shift the crowd sandblasted a layer off you. And you learned to grow more layer, and eventually the new layer was thick enough, but the growing of it was its own kind of exhaustion that you couldn't measure and couldn't report and couldn't take sick leave for. The writer asked about the girl in the red coat. I don't know how she knew about the girl. Maybe she'd heard about it, the way things circulate in any community. Maybe he'd mentioned it unprompted. Maybe she'd been there herself, which would be a coincidence of the particular kind that the world occasionally offers without explanation. He smiled, she wrote, when she mentioned it. And, he said, she asked the right question. He said he didn't answer it. Couldn't answer it, wouldn't answer it. That's the job, but the fact that it was asked. The fact that someone small and undefended by self-consciousness had looked at the monument and seen the man instead and asked the man a man question. He said it sat with him. He said it sat with him for the rest of that shift. He said, "She'll probably never know that she was the only person all day who treated me like a person." Not said with anger. Not as an accusation against the others. Just as a fact, carefully held. A 7-year-old in a red coat. The only one. I put my phone down after the third read. The flat was quiet. The broken lamp threw half light. The window seal leaked cold in the particular way it had been leaking cold since I moved in. I thought about all the things we build around the people we ask to perform strength for us. The uniform, the silence, the protocol, the sentry box, the bearskin that adds 8 inches, the boots that leave no mark of personality, the whole elaborate architecture of removing the person from our view so that we can have the symbol clean and uncomplicated without the guilt of what the symbol costs. We do this with soldiers, with athletes, with people in high-pressure jobs who hold other people's lives in their hands and are expected to look unaffected. We do this with anyone we need to believe is stronger than we are, because believing that is more comfortable than knowing they're exactly as human and as tired and as in need of being asked about it. We build them into monuments, and then we take photographs. I finished the contract job in December and went back home. On my last day, I walked the route one more time, past the park, along the mall, to the memorial. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to see him one final time. Maybe to feel like the thing I'd been carrying had a conclusion. He wasn't there that morning. Different guards, different shift or different rotation, or he'd been moved to another post entirely. The mechanics of it were opaque to me and remained so. I stood there for a few minutes anyway. The tourists arrived even at that hour, even in December's version of cold, which is less forgiving than November's. There was a school group assembling. A couple with matching beanies. A man in a high-visibility vest who might have been the same man as before, and might not have been. He was eating a breakfast roll, so the detail held, but details repeat in a city this size. There was a guard, not Marcus, doing the slow march. Left, right, pivot. I watched him for a while, and I thought, he's also tired. In some configuration of the word, some form the bearskin is covering. Some particular weight from some particular morning that he carried into the uniform and is carrying through the march and will carry home tonight and will maybe mention to no one because there is no language for it that doesn't sound like complaint, and he was not raised to complain, and the job didn't train him to complain, and so it lives in the body mute until the body either integrates it or breaks under it. One or the other, no third option. And every person who passes today will praise the discipline, the bearing, the composure, the extraordinary professionalism. And not one of them will ask. I'm writing this months later. Back home, different job, different window, and this one doesn't leak. The photograph is still on my phone. The empty stones, the pale sky, the negative space. I look at it sometimes when I'm on the tube or waiting in a queue somewhere. Not because I need to be reminded of some great lesson. I don't think it's that kind of story, and I'm suspicious of the kind of story where a stranger teaches you something profound, and you carry it home in your hand like a found object. I look at it because of the girl in the red coat, because she asked the right question at 7 years old, without preparation, without agenda, without even fully understanding probably what she was asking. And because the answer was in his eyes for exactly as long as the question lasted. And then it was gone. And the march resumed, and the world kept taking photographs of the monument. And somewhere inside it, the man took one more breath and kept going.